welcome to Los Angeles Data Platform. Today we have a session by, I'll try, Kellyn, right?
Kellyn.
Still
yeah.
no? Kellyn, okay. And the session is Infrastructure DBA in the Cloud. I have control issues. Kellyn, thanks for joining us on such a short notice. And again, to attendees, welcome to Los Angeles Data Platform. And looking forward to see the session. Hopefully all other attendees would like to see the session as well. Kellyn, it's all yours.
Okay, we are going to, can I switch back over and do this? We're going to find out. We had this sharing earlier today.
So it should be working.
Yep. Open Teams. And I don't like that view at all. Okay, that looks a little bit better there.
Okay, that's perfect.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Hopefully you can see all those slides there. My name is Kellyn Gorman. If you didn't hear that little discussion beforehand, I am an SME for Oracle on Azure at Microsoft. I'm a principal data engineer in the cloud architects and engineering team. Oracle does exist out there. We have about over 2,000 customers that are running Oracle and infrastructure as a service. Inside Azure, I also work with Oracle Bare Metal and OCI Interconnect, and we kind of backfill everything for Oracle. I also help identify workloads that can migrate off of Oracle. I came to Microsoft almost 4 years ago, and I came here to learn analytics, and AI didn't happen. Yeah, they found out that I knew Oracle, and from there it just went awry. And you can find me online. I'm really noisy on Twitter at DBA Kevlar. But I also have a blog, DBA Kevlar. I also blog out on the Microsoft Data Architecture blog. I have a lot of content out there, mostly on the infrastructure, of course, with Oracle, because, of course, there's not a lot of Oracle knowledge inside Microsoft, so they expect me to kind of write on that and do a lot of work around that. So let's be honest with everyone. The best DBAs always have control issues. We are that gatekeeper. We are, the ones that are saying, we want to make sure our databases run effectively, run efficiently, they're performing, that we are not having outages. I mean, we are those gatekeepers. It is extremely important to us. And even though my role has changed drastically over the years, everything from DevOps engineer to data engineer to cloud solution architect, whatever they want to call me, I still say I'm a DBA. I don't think there's any way around that. My discussions that I have every day, they count on that knowledge and that control issue that I have to do the right thing with their data. Why do we see customers staying with infrastructure as a service instead of PaaS or SaaS? Because you will hear customers go, well, I just want a SaaS offering. I just want some place to put my data. Or I just want a PaaS offering. I don't want to manage the system. You find out not many databases can go that. And I know you as SQL Server DBAs or Oracle DBAs, you're aware of this. You'll start looking at it and there's limitations around it. There may be business policies and SLAs around how much you have to keep backed up and retention and all these other things. There may be vendor-specific requirements that say you can't use a PaaS offering. We deal with this every day inside of Azure, and it doesn't matter which platform you're looking at, you're going to run into this. And realizing that PaaS and SaaS sound really good, they're still kind of in their infancy, and that infrastructure as a service is often where it's at. And I will keep trying to turn slides like I'm outside of PowerPoint Live too, so apologies. So just to have that kind of revamp of where we are with infrastructure as a service, this is just that standard slide that says, this is on premises, infrastructure as a service is next, where everything past the OS is the responsibility of the customer and the IT group. Platform as a service removes all of that, so you're only responsible for the application's data. And software as a service, you really just don't have to manage anything at all. It's managed for you. You're always going to have limitations with all of those. And I think that's a big deal, especially for when we're talking about my customers with Oracle, when we're starting to look at SaaS and PaaS solutions. Many times they only have 20 to 40% of the capabilities they would have for their on-prem. And infrastructure as a service allows them to build out something like they have on-prem and have all those features and everything else, with some of the management being handled by the cloud provider, which is pretty cool. So benefit to that is that it's really quick migrations. I heard from somewhere that they were like, oh, we can migrate, Oracle to PostgreSQL in 2 to 3 months. And I'm like, no, you can't. Often it's 2 to 4 years for a lot of these. When this happens, I know this for a fact. When I hear that somebody is refactoring into, Oracle into another platform, and the account team comes to me and says, can we talk to them? Oh, absolutely, because 9 out of 10 times, I'll steal that deal right back from the competing cloud and just lift and shift it into Azure. So be aware of that. Very easy to do. It also gives you the ability to keep similar architecture. You can still modernize. Let's say you've got people that are on older version of Windows or older versions of Unix. You can modernize the OS platform, get rid of some of the old technical debt that's there, and take it a little bit more in baby steps, which is kind of nice. And you can also introduce cloud features. For a lot of our customers, and we were talking about this a little earlier before we started this session, that for Oracle data, as well as the SQL Server, any of these are vital data stores that you can bring in and connect to cloud services and features that will allow you to do more around analytics and machine learning and all this new cool stuff that they want to get into without giving up what they've always had and what they always need in their actual productivity day to day. They also get to remove their data center. Nobody really wants to keep buying hardware. One reason, it's not a green approach. Second reason is that hardware is going to age out, and the cloud capability of being able to scale up, scale down, do what you need to do, change very quickly. I'm an Oracle DBA that I would get very, very frustrated, and I could say I'm a multi-platform DBA because my first database was SQL Server. I've always been multi-platform. Is that somebody would come to me and say, Kellyn, we need more storage, and I would go to my storage manager, and he'd be like, we just don't have any more. The ability of the cloud to just allocate whatever you need, deploy whatever you need, and scale it up, and not be locked into what you have on-prem really makes a huge difference. And this is also the other thing. What we found when I first started is that we were being told, oh, we've tried to lift and shift database workloads before. It never really worked. We were talking about how we size these out. This is kind of the problem with, bringing any database workloads over. It falls between infrastructure and databases. And you have database people who understand what the database requires. You have the infrastructure people who just know how to move hardware a lot of times. And, this doesn't just go into play when we start talking about licensing that is correlated and everything, but that infrastructure may not be sized right. And if they're lifting and shifting it directly, many times it's more costly. It doesn't run well. It doesn't correlate directly one-to-one. So you say on-prem CPU to virtualized CPU. I mean, this is a big difference. So understanding those differences in lifting and shifting the database workload is much more effective and very successful. And it's something that you definitely need to realize as an infrastructure DBA. So what do? We migrate that workload. Think about how we buy these. So our boss comes to us and says, I need this to fit our environment for 5 years. So you do that for 5 years. You come to your boss 5 years later and he says, nope, guess what? We don't have any money in the budget. We padded it anyway. I'd say about 80% of the databases that I do assessment on, their hardware on-prem is over-provisioned. This is a big deal again when we start talking about Oracle or SQL Server, any of these that are doing any kind of core licensing. If you can size this down, you don't need those cores because you sized core years ahead. This makes a huge difference in your cost. Your TCO can really change. The workload could really change over time. When you actually did the capacity planning, it may have been very CPU bound. And now it's IO bound. Let's say somebody added in a lot of analytics workloads into it. Those things you need to consider. And that's why it's really important to look at that workload and find out what's needed. This will keep down your costs, but it will also, I think it's important to understand what tools there are. For SQL Server, of course, you have dynamic management views, you've got your perf line, you've got scripting, your capabilities of actually identifying what these workloads are, and then sizing them out effectively. And there are white papers. I do have a link to this in the end of these slides. But also for Oracle, we have things like AWRs, OEM, ACT, but AWR is my go-to for this, the Automatic Workload Repository, because it's the workload information. It tells me exactly what Oracle needs and I can size for it. So MySQL, I've done this with SolarWinds and DBA, that you're able to also identify those workloads and then make sure that you're sizing effectively for the cloud, not for what you need 5 years ahead, but what you need now, because you can scale up as required. So architecting for the cloud, it's really important to rethink what we do for high availability, what we do for DR, all of this. There is a lot of high availability already built into a cloud, especially Azure. They've had to think about this all. Are you introducing redundancy with what you built on-prem? So absolutely go through everything that you have before you architect this out and reduce all of that redundancy that's in there that may be causing latency. Really follow best practices. Again, I have links at the end of here that will help you out on performance and VMs, best practice in networking, all of that stuff. Very important to go through. And understanding that lift and shift shouldn't be just duplicating your environment. I have those people that try to boil the ocean and duplicate everything. Those are usually the projects that are the closest to failure. It's important to look at what you need and build that out, and then build in the extra pieces that somebody wants from that. But always find, is there a service that's available that will replace what you've done on a separate VM? You don't need to have that replaced out there or added out there. Go out and find out, this is how I would architect this on-prem. Is this the best way to architect this in the cloud? It might be that, we talk about, like with Oracle, with RAC. RAC is really great when you're on-prem, but you think about it in the cloud, all those nodes are sitting in a single availability zone. And that availability zone goes down, your entire RAC node goes down. That's not high availability. And we need to rethink that. And that's when we start bringing in things like Data Guard, which are known as always on availability groups. It's designed very similarly, and it's designed in, I guess you'd say, more compatibly with Azure. So really a good idea to think those through and find the right features and products that work with your cloud. So understand your infrastructure as a service VMs. There's a lot out there. Be aware of that. And I think when you've got your decision makers looking at the cost, they're going to say, look at these A and B series. Woo, we're going to save all this money. You're not going to build a database on an A or B series. Really aren't. Enterprise level, we're going up. D series will work for some, work for a lot of SQL servers. Oracle is a little bit harder on that. L and H series, they're often just not built for a database workload. I do have some storage solutions that use L series and H series behind the scenes, but for a database itself, you wouldn't deploy just an L or an H and say, here we go. So what you do is you identify those workload needs. D series, of course, great for, general use. I use them a lot of times for standbys that you would scale up if you actually failed over to, again, save you cost. E series and M series are what we use for database workloads mostly. These are memory optimized machines. E series falls into that too, but the E and the M are really the great ones. E series for average production workloads. I really like the EBS v4 ones. The reason I like that is the D is for the premium disk and the premium solid state disk, and then the S in it is for the OS disk that I can use premium disk for that. You want that. These are extremely important when you're starting to build this out, is that many database platforms, they need a premium disk for their actual OS disk. They're hitting that a little bit harder. You want to make sure that you have temp storage and that you're putting your swap file on ephemeral disk that's attached to this. You're going to get better performance. Now, between these E series and these M series, we'll talk a little bit about this because, the M series is still in a V2. They're a little bit farther behind. E series is about to come out with their V5. And if you start looking at megs per second, you'll find that some of the E series will outdo the M series unless you're using network attached storage versus the managed disk storage. And that's when we're starting to talk about Azure Netapp files and Silk and Accelero and FlashGrid storage fabric. These are solutions in Pure Storage. These are all solutions that are only NIC bound. An M series will be fine, where an E series, if you're using premium solid state disk, you're going to find out that host dressing doesn't work on those ones, the M series, and it's not going to go up on the performance. So, and I'll go into that a little more detail here in a bit. Understand also, we're not really bottlenecked by vCPU. We can go up to 416 vCPU. That's about to go up again. 12 terabytes of memory. I mean, these are big, fast machines. Some of the H series, of course, have InfiniBand, which for all the Oracle people, their eyes light up because they're like, Exadata, InfiniBand, we must have it. It's used a little bit differently here, but there are performance benefits even for our storage fabrics that utilize those L series and H series.
Kellyn?
Yes.
Quick question. So I see you mentioning that basically the resources are infinite on the cloud, but how easy it is to upgrade? So you started with 16 cores, you want to go to, let's say, I don't know, 50, whatever.
Sure.
What does it take to basically give more resources?
Most VMs are pretty easy to upgrade. Where you have a challenge is, let's say you had an EDSV4 and you had an OS disk that was premium solid state disk, and you decide to go to an EAS that can't take it. That's where you'd have a problem scaling up or scaling down. You need to make sure that you stay kind of in the same series or go to a series that has more oomph. So could you go from an EDSV4 series to an M series? Many times you can. You just have to look at what those, what the requirements and the capabilities are on it. For scaling up, it's just a matter of just a couple minutes. I did about 80 tests on Silk storage, and we were changing this. We were running through workloads over and over again, these data workloads, and we changed it 80 different times to different VM sizes to see how they ran differently with different storage types in that, and it was just a matter of minutes. Where we ran into trouble was when we would try to go to a VM series that didn't have the performance benefits that we've moved. Like we've moved our OS disk into premium SSD, we had to completely rebuild if we had to go back to a standard solid state disk for the OS disk.
So
does that make sense?
Yeah, sounds like you're saying that if you staying within the series, if you made the right bet at the beginning, you chose the series, now you just want to keep the series, but want to scale up, this might be a few minutes, maybe very little downtime, but if you want to go from one series to another, then it's much more involved.
You have to look at it. You have to look at it. Like if we went from an EDSV4 and we had the 4 vCPU and we want to go to 16, 30, no problem whatsoever. We want to go to an M, 64 V2. I could do that as well. No problem whatsoever. But if I wanted to switch back over to a D8 V4, not S, not any of those other options, I would have to rebuild.
Got it. Thank you.
Hopefully that makes sense. Yeah, and we'll go into a little bit more on these VMs too. What makes sense, what you want to stay away from in that. So we also have something called constrained vCPU, which is really nice. Let's say you need a little bit more memory, you want a bigger chassis, but you don't need all that CPU, and you're going to get charged for it, especially on core licensing. We have something called constrained vCPU. Oracle kind of came back and told us, oh, constrained, no, we're going to charge you for everything that's on there. No, you can't. We said you bring in the auditing team, we'll prove to you. It only has, if we say an E32-8 V4 has 8 vCPUs, it has 8 vCPUs. It doesn't have 32 vCPUs. It's really nice to have these because this not only saves money, it gives the IO the higher throughput that we need for some of these high IO workloads. Oracle, Epic, high SQL Server environments, all of these need this, and yet they may not need the CPU usage that you're seeing. And again, you're saving on the core licensing. You want to make sure you have that capability. And again, all these links are in here. Feel free to click on them. I have tried to give you the capability to fish for yourself as we go through this. So this is what those kind of look like. You're looking at the M series, M8-2MS, that first one. Keep in mind, this is the chassis for the M8MS, but it only has 2 vCPU. So that's all you're going to get charged for. That's all you have to license for. And this is going to save money in the end. So a lot of our customers really, really like this. As we go down in here, you're starting to see the E42SV3. When you see numbers like that, that means that it's the 4SV3 chassis with 2 vCPU. S means that it can have a premium disk for the OS. That's really, really nice. So that tells you that these are kind of built for database workloads. So we talked a little bit about maximum availability architecture and high availability. There's different names for this depending if you're looking at different database platforms. I recognize this very quick. It's a daily conversation for me because this is one for Oracle. This is their white paper that they look at. It's really challenging because people will often think they're quoting from the white paper, but they've never really read it. You know, they don't realize it. They'll be like, oh, I got to have a rack to have a high availability. And you realize it's only a suggestion. It's never a requirement for the document. Find out clear understandings about their SLAs, their RPOs, their RTOs. What is their uptime that they need to have? And then architect for that. Don't get locked into what they had on-prem. Really important to do that. And pivot to those products and services that can cover what you need and guarantee those uptimes without having separate VMs to do it. Of course, more moving parts means more complexity. So if we can get rid of some of that, always a good thing. You know, when you're starting to talk about specific features versus products, it's really important to kind of marry the two. So many times, you know, I was talking about with high availability, when I'm bringing Oracle into Azure, I will look at DataGuard, even though they may have said, oh, well, I had rack before. Rack on premise may have made sense. When we get into the cloud, we already have a lot of high availability, security, everything built into Azure. Why would I introduce more redundancy, added latency for a product that has no benefit when they've already got it built into Azure? We want to look at that. Find out what is vendor supported. Everything that I built in for Oracle on Azure, even though it's Oracle and a third-party cloud is how they view Azure, I make sure that it has vendor support. I want that for my customers. So I go through their documentation with a fine-tooth comb, many times multiple docs, to figure out what they're requiring so that my customer can get what they need. And I arm my customer with that. That's extremely important. And there's a link there too. If you're curious what that MAA document and you have insomnia, yeah, that'll fix it for you. But it's a good document to know about because Oracle has spent a lot of time on this. Ignore the whole stuff about the Oracle Cloud in there too.
Kellyn?
Yes?
If I may, would that MMA be just a marketing gimmick? I mean,
there is some marketing documentation that's kind of bled into it in recent years with the Oracle Cloud introduction. I was really frustrated with this last iteration that came out because it just talked about for high availability, you need OCI. If you don't have OCI, we can't guarantee high availability. That was frustrating to me. You know, I'm going to just be totally blunt here, is that Larry Ellison is now over marketing, not just CTO. And it has just really changed their documentation and what you can see. I expect about once every 2 to 3 months that I'm going to have to revamp all of my support documentation for Oracle on Azure because they will have hid things. They will have changed wording that makes it even harder for me to lock in on stuff.
Got it. Okay. Now, usually you have high availability, but I've never seen something that is a second type of high availability.
Yeah, it's very interesting. Like I said, they've rack is a solution, but it isn't a high availability solution. I've had blogs about this where you talk about, you know, you've got all these nodes and they can only sit in one availability zone. They can't even have multiple availability sets. They're not compatible with Oracle. And if that availability zone goes down, the entire rack environment goes down. It's shared storage. So if you have storage corruption as well, your rack environment is a waste. You must have DataGuard. You must have your archive logs built off of there. You must have, you know, your backups moved away from there. There's a lot of reasons to really rethink about the way that rack has been presented to most folks.
Got it. Thank you.
So location concept, you're already hearing about this, regions, geography, availability zones, and availability sets, geo region, secondary region. A lot of my customers, as I'm working with them, they will have completely different requirements. One of my big energy companies right now, they have to have a primary, a standby, and a third standby that's sitting in a geo region. They need to be able to replicate that with availability zones in the first two. That's something to keep in mind, that having these discussions around, SLAs and RPOs and RTOs is extremely essential as you're going forward with your environment. A lot of times we'll have people come in and go, well, I just want the recommended practices from Azure to build this out, not realizing that it may not meet what they need for their, requirements. It's really an ongoing discussion to find out what meets their policies, what do they have documented? Again, what is their RPO, RTO as we go forward? Availability sets is pretty cool. Even though they're not Oracle compliant, they are SQL Server, PostgreSQL compliant, MySQL. You can have these so that you have multiple VMs that are there to back up your data that's there. You don't pay for anything other than that second VM, which really is cost effective. And this ensures that your data has a multiple environment to it. You don't have to deploy that second one. And most of us do anyway, because we're DBAs and we like redundancy. But keep that in mind, that availability sets are extremely important. Now, availability zones, I build that out. This is an architecture design for what I build out for Oracle. You can see that this is a fully formed Oracle environment. That means that we've got our web server, our front end, we've got app servers, we've got observers, which are the for DataGuard to failover sessions for the session level with the DG broker. Then I have a primary and a standby, and you'll see that I'm using 3 availability zones. The reason that I'm doing that is that way, at no point do I have a single point of failure. I'm trying to come up with multiple ones, including for my session application failures. So that's all out there. These are really important to understand, that when you're architecting your environment, you really need to look at all the options that are available, and that availability zones are really powerful in that ability to have something that is all, is spread across multiple data centers, that's in these different availability zones, and that you can architect it to be very, very high availability because of it. Kind of went through this. There's a link out there, but you can click on those and get more information on it. As we talked about availability regions, this is another issue that we have with some of our customers, where we may build out 2 availability zones and then a third environment that's sitting in another geo region. For a lot of my customers, if that's a requirement, a policy that they need to keep, this is easy to do. We do the same thing with SQL Server, Azure SQL, managed instance, as well as Postgres environments that I build out, and Oracle, is that we're able to, get that data where it needs to be, that log data, and have it applied to the third environment. And disaster recovery, use the DR products. A lot of people aren't aware of how much capability is built in there. They rely so much on Azure Site Recovery, not realizing that Azure Site Recovery has a low churn rate or block change rate difference. If you were using Azure Site Recovery, you wouldn't want to do it on your database server. It can only handle up to 60 megs per second. It's going up to 100 megs per second soon. But again, that isn't a lot of data for a database. I mean, we have to admit that. For production systems, there's a lot more churn than that. So look at items like Azure Backup that has volume snapshots that can put the database into a recovery mode, and then you compile your logs to get to point-in-time recovery. That's even capable for Oracle right now in Azure Backup. That is out there. The next thing that you can look at is third-party solutions such as like Commvault and that have clear capabilities in this, Pure Storage. A lot of these storage fabrics, if you're going for high I/O, also come with volume snapshots that are database aware, that allow you to do point-in-time recoveries on top of them. Absolutely awesome. And the nice thing about those are, with those point-in-time recoveries using volume snapshots, you can do a DR test in just a matter of minutes, which of course we all love, saves us a lot of time, and meets our RPOs and our RTOs. So our storage is separate. A lot of folks kind of go, oh, well, I get this megabytes per second. What does it matter? You need to look at this as a holistic approach, but recognize that your storage is completely separate. On average, Oracle does have higher I/O. Of all the workloads that I have dealt with, even at Microsoft, I have the workloads right now from Exadata that are coming across that are really pushing the bandwidth for the storage PMs and the VMs. I have some pretty massive workloads that are coming over. Like I said, most of my work is on Exadata, but it doesn't mean that, SQL Server and MySQL and PostgreSQL or anything to just ignore. These are all high I/O workloads, and they need storage that can actually perform behind them. Storage considerations, always look at what you're doing. OLTP, you're going to have a lot of block changes, but you may not have big reads. OLAP, we need to consider how much that we're reading from it. And then, of course, we've got our logging. It doesn't matter what database platform you're on. The logs seem to be the biggest heavy hits for I/O. And this is when we'll talk about it when we often bring in UltraDisk. So all of you may be going in storage. You'll be like, I'm not hearing Kellyn say a lot about UltraDisk. You'll find out why. So there's a lot of different types of storage in this. This storage that you're seeing here, most of this is for backups. We don't use this for databases. No, we do not. We use mostly premium SSD. Solid state disk that's standard is not going to serve most database workloads. And if you're seeing I/O throttling, if you're experiencing slow I/O, it's really important to know that you can go to this link here and it'll take you through the storage performance best practices. But there's also a lot of information about your VMs that you may not be privy to. Even Microsoft can't share it with you. There's something called host analyzer reports. I rely on those greatly to match up with my database performance data that I can put together. I think it's horrible as a DBA. You always know that you're guilty until proven innocent. And the host analyzer reports, along with the database reports that you may pull, no matter if you're talking AWR, dynamic management views, query store information, you can put those two together and find out exactly what's going on, because often support will say, just scale it up. And that may not be the right answer. It may be something else that's actually the culprit. So definitely consider that and follow the best practices. And this is where we get into our, please.
Can you talk a little bit more about what those host analyzer reports are? Are they something that we have to call support to get access to? Or
you will never get access to them. Sorry, dude. No. It says right when you get a hold of the host analyzer that they're not allowed to be shared with customers. It is everybody's PowerShell scripts put on with a shiny cover on it. It's only accessible by certain people. We can talk about it, but we can't share any of the data from it. It tells you everything from the VM down to the host layer underneath the VM. It shows us throttling. It shows us all your settings. Are you caching incorrectly? Do you have a kernel problem? I mean, it's going to show us everything. It is massive. It can be very overwhelming, but once you start to learn how to use them, they're incredibly valuable to your support people. And you just work with support and they can run a host analyzer report and look into it.
Are there keywords I have to say to support to actually get them to do that?
You ask for a support person to run a host analyzer.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
If suppose I have another question here. When we're talking about host analyzers, it might be possible that I'm using a PaaS solution for any of those applications, and in that case, probably there are other tenants who are using the same VM as me. And isn't it a breach of security in that sense? Like because everybody is able to view everything there.
No, the data that it doesn't show any kind of data in any way that's the customer data. What it's showing you is the metrics behind the system of performance. That's it.
Right. And if suppose I log a ticket with the support and there are certain hosts, is it possible to selectively send only that information that is relevant to my system or maybe for mine? No. So it's entirely up to
it's very clear about that. I have gone in and explained to the customer, this is what's going on, this is what I see, this is my recommendation, but I'm not allowed to share that data with the customer. Yeah, it is completely Microsoft confidential, even though it is performance metric data. Now, some of that data is completely transparent to you as well. If you go into your portal and go into the performance for VMs, those actual Azure monitors, you will see a lot of that data as well.
All right. Thank you.
You're quite welcome. So when we start talking about storage that is utilized for a database, a lot of these, you know, premium SSDs, you're seeing all Ps here, you're not seeing any SDIS or anything else. They can look pretty attractive on the price, but knowing what you're up against, and I will tell you straight out, I know I see that max burstable throughput per disk. You're going to hear a lot about burstable from the storage PMs. They'll also tell you, I think it's the most horrible thing on the planet. We are DBAs, we'd like consistency. The idea that we're going to get 30 minutes of fast performance, it really doesn't make a difference to us. It's not very often that we like it. It's going to be a pretty rare workload. So that whole burstable column, I pretty much ignore. For most of our workloads, I use a P10 for the OS disk, 128 gigs. That's enough for me to have my OS disk perform well for a database workload. And then my favorite disks, even though I may use P15 and P20s at times, P30s through P50s is where I mostly spend my time. And there's a reason for that. Although you're not seeing it on here, there is something called read-only host caching. We don't do read-write. These are our data files that I'm talking about here, and we want them to write through. We don't ever want it to cache that. So we want it read-only caching. But read-only host caching can give us great performance. And with that, that is available on the P30s up. But notice the last column there, the cache limit per disk. What that is that says that is the limit that you can allocate to host read-only caching before it disables it. Now notice the P50 is 4,096 gigs. I'm all right losing that last gig and doing 4,095 gigs, allocating that and getting everything at 1,000 megs per second. Notice that without it, I only get 250 megs per second. This is a huge jump for reads. We will often go in and fix this in customers' environments that nobody turned on the read-only host caching. The documentation around this is still extremely confusing for customers. It's not anybody's fault but the docs themselves, but this is the best way for databases. The documentation is just extremely generic. It's for generic workloads. It's not for databases, and this is where you're going to see a huge benefit for your workloads. If you need higher, so you notice that it goes from 250 up to 500 megs per second, 750, 900. The P60, P70, and P80 will give you more storage, and it'll give you a little bit more megs per second without the host level caching. But the host level caching will throw you up only to 1,000. So you've got to start giving that give or take. How many disks can I have on my VM versus how much storage space, and what do I need, and what my price point is? So if I were to take two P50s at 1,000 megs per second, that's going to beat out a P60 at 500 megs per second. I got to start doing those mathematical calculations and figuring out what's the right way to architect. Hopefully that makes sense as we start to move forward here. And here we get in UltraDisk. UltraDisk is kind of cool because you can set up the IOPS megs per second and the disk size. Now, this can be pretty costly. So you can say, well, I'm going to do 1 terabyte of UltraDisk and put my database out there. That's going to be really expensive. And you're looking at it and going, but I get 2,000 megs per second. If you notice, I could have done 2 of those other disks and gotten 2,000 megs per second and just divvied up my data. I stripe it and go. So keep that in mind as we start to talk about this. Now we need to talk about what the limitations are and why I only use this for redo logs, transaction logs. There is a reason behind this that you will hear. It's because of limitations. So some of the worst performing utilities within most databases are the backups and the jobs that happen overnight. I'm trying to get people away from our recovery manager but jobs. I want them to do storage snapshots. Storage snapshots are game changers in the cloud. Most backups are streaming backups, and they can start to extend the time, especially if you're doing a backup at night, same time you got a batch workload going. These things can throw you into a throttling point. And the reason it's throttling is because each VM, they want to make sure that nobody is the noisy neighbor. We were talking about VMs sharing on a host, different customers. So there's a limit to make sure nobody can be that noisy neighbor. So if you hit that limit, that's a pain. Storage snapshots remove that pain versus having a backup that can add to that pain. So understand that. This is where UltraDisk come in. You can't do volume storage snapshots on UltraDisk. So I gain that IO on the UltraDisk, but then I lose it again when I introduce RMAN or other backup technologies. So why would I do it? Don't want to. But my transaction logs, my redo logs, those are smaller. I can store, I can allocate how much disk I need and get faster performance for those. And I'm going to use my backup technology for that no matter what, because I need it to do a point-in-time recovery later on. So that's where these really come in to really into their sweet spot for databases. UltraDisk is with redo logs and transaction logs and other logging technology, your before image, after image. So this is where we get into cache settings. You know, these are really, really cool as we start talking about this. We want read-only caching on your host caching. We talked about that limit on there. P50s, I just wanted to write this out so you're aware of this, that you've got this in there. M series, you're going to find out the caching doesn't look very good on it. This is what we're hoping for V3, that they'll fix this, but I believe it's got the same chassis and it's not going to be able to do it. You actually get a decrease in performance on the M series when you turn on the host caching. And so M series we use with the non-storage attached, the network attached storage only. And that allows us to skip this little problem that we have. And here's where that throttling happens. So, you know, when your throttling occurs, you must absolutely look at your VM and say, what is the amount of megs per second that I'm allowed max? Whenever you're sizing this out, you can have all the storage with all this IOPS and megabytes per second that you've striped for very, very carefully, and your VM says, nope, only allowing you this. So be aware that that's one of the reasons we like the EBS V4 series and the M series for network attached, because we can get really good throughput out of those. It's extremely important when you're looking at this is what you're going to achieve. If you are dealing with a high IOPS solution and you want to take some time and make sure that you are covered, there are other storage than just Premium and Ultra. Azure Netapp files, I know a lot of people think it's a third party, it's not. You also have Silk, FlashGrid, Accelero. These are all storage solutions. Pure Storage, I would love to get a hold of it and work with it. I have not had a chance yet. Please feel free pinging any of those people from Pure Storage and tell them, get me doing this, because I have tons of customers that would love it. So let's talk about Azure Netapp files. This is a native solution. It's not Netapp, it is Azure. Netapp is just the person that designed it. So keep that in mind. These are fully managed. It's all flash, bare metal storage. It is dependent only on the NIC. So when we were talking about those storage limits that were on the VM, you've got one for storage, you got one at the network level. Storage one disappears. Netapp, Azure Netapp files only is limited by the NIC limitations. Is there a question? I heard somebody come off mute. Let me know, glad to help. They have standard, premium, and ultra options for Azure Netapp files. What's interesting is that when you are creating a solution, standard may look cheaper, but to get your IOPS, you end up having to allocate more storage and the price can go up. Always look and find out if premium or ultra might be cheaper than the lower one. As you go up, you scale up, you find out you need less storage and it ends up being cheaper and you can get a lot more oomph out of it. So always take that into consideration. Next is Silk. Silk is really interesting. I use these for Exadata decoupling because it's incredibly powerful. This is a Kubernetes data pod that is made out of B and L series VMs. The L series, we use the ephemeral disk on it to get really fast performance. And I can deploy this in multiple regions and it's really transparent to the database. It's just a storage platform for it. Really awesome stuff. It works with everything, SQL Server, Oracle, Postgres, MySQL. It's awesome stuff. And they've even dedicated pages to this stuff, the work that we've been doing lately, because it is just so much fun to work with this stuff. We have done great performance in it because it also offers compression and dedupe. It competes with hybrid columnar compression from Exadata, which is something that I really miss when I lose that from Exadata. And it has thin cloning capabilities. So you can have snapshots that don't add to your storage needs. And that's a really big deal. Again, thin clones, you can do a storage recovery to another VM, bring that database up in a matter of minutes, or do a point in time and apply your logs afterwards. It's really great stuff. And this is the performance numbers. You saw the performance numbers on ANF. You're going to see similar ones on Silk, because Silk is also only limited by the NIC. It is not limited at the network layer. That's why these, both ANF and Silk and other solutions like Accelero and FlashGrid, they work very well with the M series as well, because they are not held to that host caching limitation. They're just NIC, and they got really great throughput. So we'll take that network throughput.
Kellyn?
Yes.
Quick question about the storages. Any of them providing an option for you to encrypt the data, anonymize the data?
Yes. Yeah, the data is automatically encrypted on ANF and on Silk, and you also have other options. Let's say, you know, as a DBA, again, I always want to be the one who's in charge here, control issues. We also use, and you use this in SQL Server too, TDE. You want to do your encryption there at that level as well.
What about removing or masking the data? Is it comes from a storage itself, or it comes from solution like SQL Server?
You would have to have other solutions, SQL Server, so dynamic masking or a masking solution there's a lot of different ones that we use for Oracle. I don't like all of Oracle's masking solutions. They're quite complex to utilize, and you have to use packages to do it all. The masking within Enterprise Manager, if you deploy it, because I always believe in that, that has a great masking solution in it.
But again, it's not part of the storage.
Not masking. Nope.
Got it.
Not masking. Encryption, yes. Masking, no. So going old school. This has to do with striping disks. Any of you that are on the Windows side may be doing this a little bit different than the Linux side. The Linux side, we've always had this challenge because a lot of times people think they've mirrored and striped their disks right. And unless you see the command, you can't prove that they've done it right. You just know the performance is off, and you got to get them to recreate it. That's one of the things. I'm a fan of LVM, which is the Linux Volume Manager, which I use. We have a lot of folks that are using Oracle ASM, which is the Automatic Storage Management by Oracle. It's interesting that it's only about 50% for Oracle. You would think they were all using it. They don't. It's about 50%. For this, you know, we have to watch, especially with, there's a bug in the disk sector size that ends up in 12.1, so we have to fix it on the sector size for it. But there's a lot of issues to really think about. And when you're striping, it's really complex. Many times people miss the host level caching turning on, or they didn't stripe correctly, or they didn't put the data files on the file or on the storage that they thought they did. It's one of the reasons that I like Silk and, you know, other solutions like that, like ANF and Pure and that, is there's not a lot of buttons to turn. You just plug it in and it runs. It's plug and play. Where when we're starting to talk about this is usually people that are trying to save as much money as possible, and it's fraught with error. So it's really important to make sure that you have really crossed your T's and dotted your I's with this. And we already talked about this, so I'm going to skip that. I know we're already at 7:50 here, but definitely look at volume snapshots. Incredibly important on that side. So simplify your shift to the cloud. Most folks think they're going to go to the cloud and they're going to lose all their capabilities. I hear this from Oracle DBAs all the time. They think they're going to go, all their databases are going to be on Windows. You know, they're never going to be able to write another shell script. I have to relax them. We build out Enterprise Manager. I would say the same thing. Whatever tools that you're used to using on-prem, no matter if it's the SQL Server Management Studio, whatever, use that in the cloud. You know, try to reuse as much as possible. You have your PowerShell scripts, bring them over, update them with AZ commands, and use them in the cloud. Bash scripts, same thing. Anytime that you can utilize the same tools, and many of these that we're talking about here, when we talk about, you know, Redgate, when we start talking about the IDEA tools, all of these, they're available in the marketplace. You can use them in the cloud just like you did before. They may run on a VM, whatever you need to do, but you can duplicate those and they are worth the price of that VM. Get them up and running. Also, versus running them on-prem, if you're monitoring stuff in the cloud from on-prem, that means egress charges. it can be pretty expensive. It's worthwhile to have the environment built in the cloud itself. And then automation. Absolutely believe in DevOps. We have a lot built out in Terraform with Ansible to make it easy. Keep in mind that for you DBAs, you're really valuable to this process, because many times with DevOps processes, I start with the bash or the PowerShell scripts that the DBAs have created, and then we evolve them. And it may start out from there and go into, you know, it doesn't matter. We'll pick them up and start working with them and start to bring them into a single tool. We'll maybe build them into Ansible, and then we'll go from Ansible completely into Terraform with Ansible and CI/CD built in. But you know that those scripting skills that you have are incredibly valuable to this. And know that it's not just the infrastructure. You know, that database workload is really an afterthought. And when you're going into support with Microsoft, their infrastructure folks that are brought in for VMs, and they may not understand your database, and they'll say, oh, just throw iron at it, just scale it up. Find out what the real cause is. Really take the time. And we talked about those host analyzer reports. There are absolutely incredible people inside Microsoft support that know host analyzer inside and out. I have taken time to learn from them. This is how I became familiar with these and how to work with them with my customers that I deal with. Find out what's going on. Demand that they fix them, escalate the support ticket if you need to, but don't just throw iron at it. Don't just scale it up if they're not able to prove that you have IO throttling or that you're starved for CPU. If that's not what's really going on and people are just like, no, I don't know, just scale it up, don't accept that answer. Keep going in until you find out what the problem is. And manage with what you know. Keep your backup, your replication tools that you know when you first, like I said, unless they're a performance problem, then start going to storage snapshots, things like that. Again, bring out your tools that you're already familiar with. And then you can simulate a past solution inside infrastructure as a service. For SQL Server, you have managed instance, which makes life easy. For Oracle, we have Enterprise Manager that allows us to simulate everything. With the Lifecycle Management Pack and the Cloud Management Pack, I'm able to set up automated patching. I'm able to set up corrective actions that will fix things as things go down. We've got SQL Server agent jobs that are now available in the cloud. Things like that, you want to be able to do those kind of things. And then, of course, like I said, automate everything. As you're working and deploying this, you know, let's say you're building a VM that you're going to be using for 25 SQL servers. Build it from an OS image, build it the way that you want, build an image gallery, and then reuse that over and over again in deployments. Don't create each one by one. That's a lot of time to be spent. And review your database workloads. Know your infrastructure. Know that you want to migrate that workload, not the existing infrastructure, because it is very different in the cloud. There are calculators that help you with your actual SQL Server workload and migrating it and translating it into Azure sizing. We also have one that's out on the data architecture blog for Oracle to help them out. That's about to become a tool inside the portal as well. So that'll be really nice to have. And bring your existing tools in there and know that what tools you have that are compatible with the cloud. Many times people come in and go, oh, I recognize this is in the marketplace. And, you know, I already have this part of Veritas and I'd like to keep it. Find out that it's available in the marketplace. Always do your research. You'll find out that most products are out there. Azure is a big, big cloud. So there's a lot. And with that, I will tell you there's a lot of references out there. I've tried to put them out, links for the ones for the SQL Server Performance Guidelines. We follow a lot of that for Oracle as well. It's very good advice. The Oracle and Azure pages, understanding availability zones, virtual machines and disk performance, premium storage, understanding that network performance. We didn't go over that very much, but understanding accelerated networking and how important that is for database workloads and application tiers, and infrastructure automation, and then information on UltraDisk that I have out here. And with that, we have 4 minutes left for any questions that may still be available. Unless I lost Steve.
Oh, I'm right here.
Yay.
Great presentation. And you're right on time. Yep.
Are there any questions about anything that I went over? And these slides I will send over to Steve afterwards, so he has them and you have all the links and everything too.
Let me see, let me check the chat.
Pete went to sleep. It's too late for him.
No, I didn't.
Kelly, you were speaking about some of these storage factors that can help us a lot in our performances, right? So are there any white papers? I mean, is it possible to add 1 or 2 links to those white papers so that in case if we want to refer back, we could always go? I mean, there's a lot of material everywhere, but
yes.
Oh, you have them in the references.
Yes, if you go to this link right here that I've highlighted, the virtual machine and disk performance, that's a really good one along with the Azure Premium Storage. And you're going into kind of the overview, and then there'll be deeper content behind that. It covers a lot there.
Thank you so much.
You're
a great presentation, by the way.
Thank you.
Yeah, I wasn't aware of some of those additional storage options. I was kind of under the impression that everything was Azure storage. And hearing from you in particular about your success with some of those others, knowing how particular you are, makes me start thinking about some of those and knowing I need to talk to some people to look at some of my VM workloads for some better storage, because we, at my employer, we've got some issues from that perspective. Yeah. I mean, the very first issue is something that we all deal with. It's called crap code that I don't have access to fix. I have to get some other teams to fix it, but there are some things I need to look at from a storage perspective there. So I'm glad I stayed up to hear that part.
Yay, finding out what is actually causing the performance issue if you are being throttled at your IO level. Knowing that you have that limitation in your VM. I know I worked with a customer today that said, you know, hey, my POC didn't go as well as I planned. So we did a quick assessment, looked at their environment, found out that one, they were on a D series, that they didn't have OS disk that was set to premium SSD. We got into it, their temp was in the wrong place, their swap file. All of this impacted the performance of their POC. So we made that change. And then I turned on host level, you know, read-only caching on their premium disk. The premium disk they chose were all right. You know, their P30s. I may have gone a little higher, but it was all right. And then suddenly they were like, this is excellent. This is awesome. This works great. Knowing the bells and whistles, all those little buttons that you can turn on this really makes a huge difference. And a lot of these white papers, a lot of these links go into that, but it's buried. There's so much other content, and they're trying to cover so many different types of workloads with one paper. It makes it hard. So hopefully these will direct you to some of the better information on that. And if we talk about Silk and ANF and some of those others, those are huge game changers for us. You know, Exadata was one of those nuts they wanted to crack, but nobody thought they could. And then I started migrating over Exadata's left and right and getting better performance than they were getting in their Exadata. And they realized that we did have an ability to do this. And much of that goes back to Azure Netapp files and Silk and Accelero and, you know, Flash Grid Storage Fabric. I mean, there's phenomenal storage solutions. There's a lot of companies that are building out these almost engineered systems out of VMs that you can use as a storage layer. And with that, it's 8 o'clock. Is everybody ready for a nap now?
Almost. But before we can say goodbye, we have a t-shirt raffle. We're raffling every monthly meeting. We're raffling a t-shirt. So please go ahead and click on the tiny URL link that Ilana provided. Once we collect enough people to raffle, we'll raffle. Usually we need about 5 to make it more interesting. And again, it's a custom t-shirt with the Los Angeles Data Platform logo.
I would like to say, I know if anybody was here in the past, we offered different colors. We had to end that, and we're only offering white right now. So apologize for that, but our vendor had difficulty accommodating the print on different colors, and the contrasts weren't working right.
It's still a nice, free custom t-shirt.
Very
I
pretty.
hope I win. I need a t-shirt that's not dark colored.
All right. And this is US only. Also, I have to say, I apologize if we didn't mention that in advance. It's on the form, but yeah, US residents only.
Cool. Ohio's still in the United States.
Still is. Are there plans that you might want to share with the group?
Not that I'm aware of. I don't work for the government. I'm a DBA.
Stuff happens.
Yeah, you just misplaced a high record, and that's all.
I have 4.
Okay.
Want to wait for one more? Or?
Yep. Think.
Okay. Actually, I didn't realize my little raffle tool shut down. Let me fire up Management Studio, my magical raffle tool.
Kellyn, just the SQL VM performance team, Pam and David, do they talk much about the non-Azure storage, or are they pretty much focus on SQL with the Azure storage?
No, the work that I've done with non-native storage, but including A&F, it's what got me the technical, what do they call it? The Technical Solution Excellence Award this last quarter. And they're coming to me now. I'm working with both the PM groups, not in the SQL Server group, but I do have SQL Server folks coming to me and ask me, will that Silk stuff work with SQL Server? That was one of the big deals. This Silk, the company, Silk is just inundated with the amount of work that I brought them. And now Microsoft is very aware of them. So now Microsoft is pursuing them quite heavily with a number of deals. They're going to be at Data Transformation Academy. They're like the new star child there. They love them. But A&F, same thing. These storage solutions, I think it's just natural for them to say, first, they think Azure Netapp Files isn't Azure. They think it's Netapp. And it really is a native solution. It needs to be renamed to Enterprise Files. But they think that they have standard solid state disk, they have Ultra, and they have, Premium, and they have Ultra. And that's it. They don't realize that there's a lot of other storage solutions out there. And we have those discussions. Like I said, I'm in a lot of the leadership meetings with the PMs, and they'll go, we've got bursting. We can do bursting for 30 minutes up to an hour. And I'm like looking at them like, you're not doing me any good whatsoever. I'm going to go back to Silk now. And I think that's important that we make a great stand of saying, I know you in development think this is really cool, but this is not what customers need. And the SQL Server group are starting to see that too. The CAE team that I'm on has specialists from across the board, networking, identity, AI, everything, machine learning. And we do have SQL Server specialists as well. And some of them are absolutely right behind us going, oh my gosh, I have high IO workloads too. I want an introduction to this group. I want to start working with this too. Yep, I just lucked out that I found it first. That's all. Does that answer that, Peter? Or do I need more coffee?
You do not need more coffee.
I vote for more coffee.
I will.
More coffee.
I'm periodically in contact with those PMs because I have a couple of VMs I have a rather large M series VM that I would like to not be an M series VM anymore because it's expensive.
Do you have premium disk attached to that or attached disk?
Yes.
You're not going to be happy. Yeah, you are not getting the best out of that. Can I ask how much vCPU?
32 V-cores, I think.
Oh, yeah. Get off of it. Yeah. Go to an E32 DSV4.
Yeah, we were told that's where we needed to go because we thought we were being throttled, so we went to the M series.
I described your situation, yeah. As soon as they see throttling, they just throw iron at it, and it's not the right solution. One, you need to find out what's actually the bottleneck. Two, if you're using attached storage, yeah, it'd be good to do an assessment on it, absolutely. And I would say probably the E series is a better solution for you. If you can stay on the M series, if you were going to go, network attached storage versus doing the managed disk, but for me, I would say go E and save some money. That M is very costly.
Yeah, I'm now going to say dirty words for the SQL folks on the call. There's a lot of merge statements in the SQL code that's hitting that.
Yeah. Yeah.
And the team responsible for that code has told us that the performance is terrible on this box, and we don't have time to fix the merge statements.
Yeah. Get yourself at least some faster storage to get through it. Yep. And, you may look at, and this is what happens to me, is that somebody says, oh, you got to get to, like Silk or da-da-da-da-da. And we find out that really it's the transaction logs of where the latency is. I mean, find out where the latency is. And then you can say, well, I'm just going to allocate a small amount of ultra disk, put my transaction logs there, and boom, I'm fixed. You absolutely need to take a look at the performance hit and find out where it is and then fix it by the latency. Tune for time or you're wasting time. You know how this goes.
Yep, and I also know that before I was at my current employer, a lot of the servers were moved from on-prem to IaaS, and a consulting company, a large consulting company, simply advised lift and shift, and our cloud team ran with it rather than re-architecting anything.
Yep.
And that consulting company also was not able to successfully explain to the DBAs who were there what the ephemeral storage actually was. So one of the problems we are fixing is that on that M series, TempDB is not on the ephemeral. So
great.
That's on the change control doc. It was supposed to be this week, but reasons it didn't happen, so it's going to be next week.
That first document right there that you're seeing on the screen, the SQL Server Performance Guidelines, that's a really good one for you.
Yeah, it's printed out on my floor, in fact. I really want to make it I want to talk Rob Sewell into making it a default thing in DBA checks, but I think I'm going to have to do it myself.
Everybody have a good evening. Bye now.
Bye-bye.
Good night.